Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Elliot Gerson from the Aspen Institute. I'm absolutely delighted to be here, although I think Alice is probably more delighted because of the air traffic controller problems. Walter Isaacson and I were both sitting on shuttles in Washington, and mine was the only one that got through. And Alice was looking forward to wondering just how she was going to honor herself. But with this incredible outpouring of admirers and fans of Alice Henkin, I think that we could have had just a series of people come up here and speak extemporaneously and passionately from their hearts without any preparation about what a remarkable, inspiring woman she is. But because of Walter's bad fortune, and he deeply, deeply regrets not being able to be here. Apparently, as some of you may have seen, the computer of the air traffic controller system broke down, and all the flights are being controlled manually, which was not particularly a welcome bit of news to get from the pilot as we were sitting there. But it is now my actual deep pleasure to take Walter's role here today to celebrate the Aspen Institute's Justice and Society program and its, as I said, remarkable, inspirational, indefatigable leader of more than 30 years, Alice Henkin. I'd also like to thank our host committee and the benefactors of this luncheon. We're overwhelmed by the support and enthusiasm of all of you. The names of those people are on cards in your program. They're too frequent for me to mention. But we are absolutely thrilled to be able to host this special luncheon to honor our dear Alice. She has been, in many in this room know, I think everyone in this room knows, one of the nation's quiet, unassuming, but incredibly effective champions of international justice and human rights. Diminutive only in stature, she has been toweringly influential with judges and lawyers all around the world, laymen, statesmen, and citizens, regarding fundamental liberties and principles based on the fundamental equality of human dignity. So it is fitting that we gather here to honor her for her long and her selfless career, and particularly for the remarkable contributions she has made at the Aspen Institute for more than 3 decades. Alice's awesome contributions leading her program are not just abstract and theoretical. Yes, while many of the seminars that so many of you have attended are extraordinary exercises in the intellectual exploration of what words like justice, equality, and human rights mean, Alice, while admittedly an intellectual, is at heart an activist. And it has been impossible for anyone to leave those seminar tables for more than 30 years without a rededicated mission, not just to continue the discussion of essential principles of justice, but to go back home, and for them it's homes all over the world, to win, to establish, to police, and guarantee those fundamental principles. Alice herself, of course, is an accomplished lawyer, widely known all around the legal communities of the world. She's earned numerous awards for her work over the years. And obviously, all of you represent just one little bit, the tip of the iceberg, of an incredibly devoted fan base. Receiving an invitation to one of her seminars is a coveted privilege, and everyone who attends them hopes very much for the reward of being re-invited. The program has included, of course, and I think most of you know this, many Supreme Court justices, many high court judges around the country and around the world. This include Justice John Paul Stevens, William Brennan, and of course, probably most significantly, Justice Harry Blackmun. For Justice Harry Blackmun, Alice's seminar was a life-transforming experience. And those are words that are often overused, but I think for Justice Blackmun, they are apt. He became instrumental in determining the content of that seminar and indeed moderated it over the better part of 2 decades. And it was enormously influential in affecting the course of his own legal career and the trajectory and changes in his judicial philosophy. The experience at Alice's seminar for Justice Blackmun was so extraordinary that he asked that some of his ashes be distributed on our Aspen Meadows campus. And actually, I'll never forget, I happened to run into Linda Greenhouse, Justice Blackmun's biographer, one day in Washington, and just before her book was going to come out. And I mentioned this to her, and she looked at me like I was from Mars and said, "No, what are you talking about? That's not possible. He was buried at Arlington Cemetery." And I said, "No, Linda, some of his ashes are clearly at the Aspen Institute, and we celebrate that memory." And she said, "That can't be. Who told you that?" And I said, "Well, Alice Henkin." And she said, "Well, then it must be true." And of course, it is true. And if you have any doubt about the influence that that seminar had on him and had on so many others, probably half the people in this room, I commend to you a wonderful piece in the Supreme Court Review a few years ago by Dennis Hutchinson at the University of Chicago, who actually traced the experience that Justice Blackmun had in Alice's seminar as a seminal influence in redirecting his judicial philosophy. And of course, that has had tremendous implications for American jurisprudence. Along with her husband, Lou, a giant among international law scholars, which I became aware of when I studied international law at Yale. His influence reached there, and indeed every law school in the world. Alice has been an absolutely beloved figure on our Aspen campus each summer, organizing her seminars with a keen eye for detail and a passion for the values-based dialogue that defines the Aspen method. And she always produced and choreographed a remarkable experience among the learned judges and lawyers and laymen around those tables that would follow over a course of 5, 6, or 7 days. Part of what made Alice's seminars such a success over the years has been the wonderful diversity of its participants, which often include not just a cross-section of legal luminaries around the country and the world, but senior officials from the prison system, from the CIA, from the FBI, and she would sprinkle people around the table to make sure that the dialogue about those fundamental values was always vigorous and that different opinions were represented and respected around the table. It wasn't just that they might read Hobbes and Rousseau and compare them, but there would actually be people at the table, and still are, with very different views of these concepts. And those dialogues, I think, left everyone enriched and more dedicated to their own principles. Another one of the program's most prominent boosters is Richard Goldstone, the former South African jurist of renown, who is now, of course, serving as head of the United Nations fact-finding mission on the Gaza conflict. He attended one of Alice's seminars when, with the D.C. Circuit, with then D.C. Circuit Judge Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Anthony Kennedy, when I believe he was sitting on the Ninth Circuit. Justice Goldstone recalls that experience from 1984 as one of the most important influences in his life. And to this day, he remains incredibly dedicated to Alice and her influence on him and so many of his colleagues. We are celebrating Alice today, but I am very, very pleased to tell you we are not saying goodbye to Alice. Alice has pledged to remain at the Institute, where she will continue to lead some of her seminars, in particular a seminar that she has designed to train American judges about the principles of international human rights law. She will also be suggesting many new avenues for us to pursue, One of her passions at the moment, for example, Alice always at the cutting edge, is to look at the implications of climate change on international justice, and particularly the disproportionate burdens of climate change on the most dispossessed people in the world. But I'm also pleased that while Alice will continue to do all of those things, the incredibly rich foundation that she has built over 30 years is going to be maintained, and it's going to be expanded in many exciting new ways by Meryl Chertoff, who joins us now as co-director. She's part-time. She will come full-time with us next year. Meryl is the director of the Sandra Day O'Connor Center for the Study of the Judiciary at Georgetown Law School, and will be the director in the future, working closely with Alice, we hope, for many, many years to come. So again, with the great apologies and regrets, personal regrets of Walter Isaacson, who is one of Alice's biggest fans and admirers, and looks forward to a chance in person to give her a hug when the air traffic controllers get their computer rebooted. It is my great pleasure to join in recognizing Alice, asking her to join me at the podium and say a few words. Alice Henkin. I also have this beautiful vase to give her, and it simply says the Aspen Institute Justice and Society Program in appreciation, Alice Henkin. Alice, it's heavy. I will take it down to the table, and it is now all yours. Thank you, Alice.
Thank you, Elliot. I've been asked 2 questions. I forget that I'm short. I want to say, first of all, it's so good to be here. I love reunions. You know, sometimes you have a fantasy, I have a fantasy of being at my funeral. And who's going to be there? Well, I now know, and I don't have to die. I want to mention 3 people, 2 of whom are here. Mary Holland and Michael Doyle, who for the last several years have contributed smarts, wisdom, and dedication to the Justice and Society program. They could not have been any better, and I thank you. I want to mention a 3rd person who's not here, and that's my husband, Lou Henkin. I think many of you know him. Sometimes people will say to me, how did you get interested in, how did you get working in international human rights? And if I'm feeling kind of naughty, I say pillow talk. In fact, much of what I know, and much of what I do is due to Lou. He wrote the book. The program has had a double focus. One has been the seminars that Elliot mentioned that many of you have been to, which was an effort to go back to first principles and to worry about the kinds of things we worried about at college, at graduate school, at law school. But now we were grown-ups. And how do these issues look now? And it's been a wonderful experience. We have had very, very busy people, and we get them into Aspen. They can't get out easily. And we've spent a week, originally 2 weeks, doing this. I've learned a lot. The focus of the program has been narrow because we've been small, and I'm very pleased to say that it will be expanded by Meryl Chertoff, who will be working on public programs from the Washington office. And Merrill, I welcome you to the program. I now want to do something that I'm so happy to do, which is to honor the Morvillo law firm. I know there are other names in the firm, but I was trying to memorize them, and I realized I was stumbling. So if you will forgive me. The Morvillo firm has been a supporter of the program. 3 of the partners have participated, and they thought enough of it to provide funds so that we could invite people who couldn't afford to come to the program, and provided some of the diversity that we need to have. Bob himself is the chair-elect of the Federal Bar Council, and has been wonderfully helpful to me. Bob, can you step up? I want to give you, for the firm, what will be the first annual Justice and Society Program Award for all the help you've given us and for your continuing confidence and support in what we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Very nice. And
Okay.
it's ironic that you're giving us an award because we've supported this organization in large part to applaud you and your good work. And as you mentioned, there were 3 partners, and the first partner who went was my late partner, Jack Tighe, who did everything with Grace, and I saw that Grace came here today. She was there as well, and
Yes.
It's been a fabulous association, and we really thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, in the interests of time, and all of you have very busy schedules, we want to proceed with our program and a very special discussion. This is now actually the one responsibility I expected to have today, and it's a very easy one, given the justifiable fame of both of our special guests today. I think if we were trying to find 2 people who could be better equipped than these 2 to frame the legal issues that have defined so much of Alice's career, we'd have a very, very hard time doing that. They both really epitomize in what they do the issues that have meant so much to Alice, and questions, of course, of justice and the relation of law and society. And as I said, neither needs much of an introduction. Jeffrey Toobin, of course, is the most recognized and I think the most respected legal journalist in the country today. He writes, of course, and has beautifully written for the New Yorker for many years. He's the senior legal correspondent for CNN. He's written 5 wonderful books, the most recent one, The 9, inside the Supreme Court a couple of years ago. And I can say that, having been a Supreme Court clerk myself, I don't think there is a single better book about the workings of the Supreme Court than Jeffrey's. He's also been in a wonderful position to explain for a sophisticated general audience the importance of legal concepts through the prisms of some of the most significant legal issues in our time, whether they're Elian Gonzalez or the 2000 election or Ken Starr and Bill Clinton or O.J. Simpson, Oliver North. Jeffrey Toobin has written brilliantly about the broader significance those issues have presented in the fabric of American law and justice. Michael Sandel, the Robert and Ann Bass Professor of Government at Harvard, now a TV celebrity in addition to being probably the most famous the lecture and probably the most famous course in the United States, the course he teaches at Harvard called Justice, which has had 14,000 students, I think. I asked him if that is the most popular course in the history of Harvard, and he couldn't tell me because they can't find the records from the 17th century. But we think it's a fairly safe bet that it is, in fact, the most popular course ever at Harvard. But he has an audience now much further extended than zip code 02138. His books have been translated in at least 10 languages. His commissioned lecture series are heard, most recently a BBC series, by literally tens of millions of people around the world, and he is perhaps our most distinguished public philosopher. I am going to make it very simple. I'm just going to ask them both to come up, and they are going to have a conversation, and then I think Jeffrey is going to answer some questions, and it will be a treat for all of us. Jeffrey Toobin and Michael Sandel.
Thanks, Elliot.
Thank you, sir. There we go.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. If I could, I am not going to answer questions. I am going to take questions from the audience for Michael, because it's his show here today. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming. We're delighted to pay tribute to Alice. Obviously, the first question that everyone wants to know is, what would Immanuel Kant say about Sarah Palin? But we'll get to that eventually, okay? Now, the great thrill of reading your book, which I brought, because I've been on book tour, and you should always bring the book, is that you give a variety of approaches, I mean, philosophical approaches that you describe. You start with utilitarianism, libertarianism, you go to Aristotle, our friend Kant. Yesterday, the Democrats came forth with their Senate health care plan. I wondered if you could sort of use some of the tools in the book, comparatively, to analyze how one would look at a health care plan using these tools.
Right. And it's not something that we've done very much in the public debate about health care, which I think is too bad, and I think it's made the health care debate much more difficult. I was watching C-SPAN over the summer when President Obama was losing control of the health care debate, and I was watching him at a town hall meeting. And I heard him say, we have to bend the cost curve in the out years. And I thought, if that's the way he's talking about health care, he's never going to get it. And I was hoping that he would go back to talking about health care, as he can do, as a moral issue from the standpoint of moral principles and justice, which he has done subsequently. I think there are two rival ways of thinking about justice that are rumbling around beneath the surface of the health care debate. There is a principled grounds for objecting to universal health care, though we don't really hear it spelled out this way. It's something like the libertarian idea that people should be free to choose for themselves, and it's coercion for the government to mandate that a healthy young person have health insurance if he or she doesn't want to, would rather take the chance. And it's coercion if the government requires by law that you and I pay for somebody else's health care when they're sick. Each person should be free to choose for himself or herself to give to a charity, but it's not for the government to coerce us. So there is a theory, a libertarian approach to justice that offers a principled objection to the whole idea. That on the one hand. And on the other hand, there's a reply to that argument that we also haven't heard very much of from the proponents. I think the strongest version of that reply is, we're all in this together. There are certain mutual responsibilities we have as democratic citizens sharing a common public life, and one of them is to see to it that people who, through no fault of their own, fall ill should not have their access to health care governed by their ability to pay. We're in this together. This is part of what it means to be a citizen of a democratic society. I think those are the two, and that second argument draws on a theory of justice that says justice isn't only about individual rights and choice, it's also about civic duty and the common good. So there are two different theories of justice that are rumbling around that make sense of the rival views, but we haven't heard much about them.
Now your book goes all the way back to Aristotle, and
Yeah.
I guess in places even farther back than that. The two arguments you made about healthcare, one was the libertarian argument, was a very Republican, capital R, conservative
Yes.
one that is still a vibrant political tradition here.
Right.
And the other argument was a more activist government approach.
Yes.
We've gone through a period that where Republicans were ascendant. Do these theories change over time? Do they reflect the times they're in, or do they change the times that they are put forth in?
I think some of each. I think part of the political, I think the background to the whole healthcare debate is a background of the last 3 decades when the libertarian idea, free individual choice, it's my money, I earned it, I deserve to keep it and to decide what shall be done with it. That idea has gained a lot of traction in the public imagination, in the public culture. It goes back to 1980 in the Reagan and Thatcher years. But it was a period really the last 3 decades before the financial meltdown, and that may or may not mark a shift, a decade of market triumphalism. And it goes with this libertarian, a certain version of individualism, that it's my money, I earned it, or as the politicians say, it's your money, you get to keep it, you know how to spend it best, the government shouldn't interfere. And even when we've had Democratic presidents elected, or in the case of Britain, Tony Blair, the Clinton-Blair years, I think in some ways accepted much of the premise of the market triumphalism of the Reagan-Thatcher years, moderated but consolidated that set of understandings. So now when it comes to a healthcare debate, a big public purpose, it's going against the current of the time, I think, to try to make the second case, the case in the name of civic obligation and the common good, because we haven't laid the ground in the moral culture and in the political culture for that way of understanding politics.
Over the long scope of sort of market libertarian ideas,
Yeah.
what do you think are the most effective responses? I mean, who by name, or
Right.
which philosophers, and also what ideas
Right.
seem to you the best answers to what are, at least in political terms, still very powerful arguments?
They are powerful arguments. I think the best way to take them up, now I teach political philosophy for a living, so I should say, well, if we studied various political philosophers, it would shake people from those ideas. I think we should start in public discourse with concrete examples. And here would be one example. The underlying idea that I think needs to be challenged and debated publicly is whether the results that markets produce, the income distribution, the distribution of wealth and opportunity, if they are the product of a free market, are they, in virtue of that, just? There is a powerful intuition out there that says yes, or assumes yes. Here would be a way of challenging it. And I know there are a good number of judges in the room. What does the Chief Justice of the United States make on his annual salary?
That's
about
$210,000.
around $210,000 a year.
Not even a utility infielder would get out of bed for that money. Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
a utility infielder wouldn't.
Yeah.
And there is another judge who makes more than that in the United States, a good bit more, Judge Judy. Judge Judy makes, I looked it up. It's not that I watch her show, Jeff. I watch your show,
Yeah,
not
sure,
hers.
yeah.
She makes $25 million a year. Now, the market has dispensed that. That is the result of a market. But would anyone think that because the market gives Judge Judy $25 million, and because we as a society give Chief Justice Roberts $210,000, that the contribution to the common good that Judge Judy makes is 100 times that of Chief Justice? Now, some people in the room are saying, well, maybe so.
That's right.
But that's a debate we should have. Yeah, actually, the example is drawn to appeal to those, Jeff, who you said hold this free market idea. I can see it has that example has a kind of backlash effect in this group.
It is, but how about healthcare in particular? I mean, one of the ideas that is so well known in your book that even I've heard of it is John Rawls, the original position.
Right.
That would it? I mean, obviously, if you said that in a press conference, it probably wouldn't mean much to a lot of people. But the idea that, and please tell me if I'm distorting it horribly, but that shouldn't we have a healthcare system that if you didn't know whether you were rich or poor, and you were going to be thrown in one side or the other, you'd want to have a healthcare system that takes care of anybody. Is there a way of making a philosophical argument like that appealing, understandable to, non-Harvard undergraduates?
I think so, and I hope so, and you've put it very well. It's the basic idea. Now, Rawls talks about thinking about principles of justice behind a veil of ignorance, and in the Justice in Society program, we read about that and debate about that, but the idea is just as Jeff has said. It's the fundamental moral intuition that a lot of people have. If we didn't know where we would wind up, what would you think is fair? If you didn't know if you were going to be healthy or sick, rich or poor, what kind of a society would you like to live in? There is something intuitively powerful about that. It connects with the idea there, but for the grace of God go I. We could illustrate it by telling stories about people who fall ill through no fault of their own and they can't afford it. And what if that were you? I think exactly the way you framed it is a way that political leaders could frame a better, more elevated case for health care. And they haven't really been too effective at that.
Do people out there in the world use philosophy without knowing it?
Yes.
How do they do that?
Yes. I think every time we argue whether it's about health care or bonuses and bailouts and the outrage over that, or affirmative action, or same-sex marriage, or income distribution, whatever side we take, and we debate these questions fiercely, people have convictions, they have opinions on these questions. And lying behind those opinions and convictions are big moral principles, big ideas about what justice is and what freedom means and why equality matters and what counts as equality and what is the claim of the common good. We all have, just beneath the surface of our convictions or the things we hear on people calling on talk radio. I like to listen to talk radio.
Wow.
Including right-wing talk radio. Because I think however outrageous are the things people say, well, two things. First, I think there's a lot to be learned. Because I'm interested to listen to people who call in Rush Limbaugh, that type of thing. There is a kernel of a thought sometimes in what they say. And
high praise indeed.
But I think that's true across the political spectrum. And here, this goes back to Aristotle. Plato and Aristotle had a big disagreement. Plato thought you do political philosophy from the philosopher's point. He steps outside the cave and looks at the sun. But I think, and here Aristotle, I think, was onto this, we cave dwellers, the image of the cave where most of us just see shadows on the wall, not the real thing. And Plato said, yeah, but a few people go out and look at the sun, and they should govern. I think political philosophy has to proceed within the cave, has to give the claims of the cave their due. which is to say has to start with ordinary opinions and convictions, even if they may be expressed in shouting matches on cable television and on talk radio. Because those intuitions and passions are the ingredients from which political philosophy, and I also think public deliberation of a more elevated kind, has to do its work. To start with the settled and even narrow-minded convictions people have, and then pose a counterexample or ask a question and test that principle in another case where they may be made a little bit uncomfortable. So it's my job in a way is really gently to help people, to invite people to feel uncomfortable in this way. And we all have tensions in the convictions that we have. And to bring that to light and to critical reflection and then to argue with one another, people who disagree, and to listen, you have to kind of listen to be able to do that, even with people who disagree. That's the beginning of political philosophy. And it seems to me that to be a democratic citizen, you have to be something of a philosopher. And that's my project.
Well, one issue that has excited a lot of passions here in New York and elsewhere is the soon-to-be, I guess, upcoming trial of the newest New Yorker, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, and his 4 Confederates. And one of the things you write about in the book is sort of the need to be perceived as just, as well as the need to be just. And clearly, one of the reasons why this trial is coming to New York is that, as Eric Holder and even the president has said, is we want to show the world that our justice system works and can handle a case of this magnitude. Is that a legitimate goal, or should the legal system really be about providing justice in the individual case and let perceptions take care of themselves?
I think it's a hard question and a great question, Jeff, that you ask. I think there are 2 issues here. One is a matter of justice and the other is a matter of prudence. And when we're deciding policy, we have to wrestle with both and exercise prudence in the light of what's just. I think it's a good thing that he's being tried in U.S. federal court rather than in a military tribunal for just for substantive reasons, not only for public relations, but because I think that the United States federal courts can do justice in this case. I think it's a second question whether the U.S. federal court trial should be in New York City or not, and I think that's a prudential question. And I think you could answer the question of whether it should be in a U.S. federal court one way, and you might come out differently on the prudential question of which court where.
So you want to see it in our system, but you're okay with a change of venue?
For reasons of prudence, given the world we live in.
But not any place too inconvenient for me to cover.
No.
The New York thing is working well for me, actually.
Right. Well, there's an argument of prudence, and I would weigh that.
I recognize that's not a very important.
Right.
I joked about Sarah Palin at the beginning.
Right.
But how important are ideas versus how important are messengers?
Yeah.
Because, one thing that those of us who cover politics always do is, we talk about, is this a good Republican year? Is this a good Democratic year? But we also talk about, is so-and-so a good candidate? And Sarah Palin, whatever else she is an extremely compelling personality to a lot of people. And how much, in thinking about philosophical ideas, do you think about the packaging, and how much do you think about the substance?
I think packaging and substance have to go together in politics, because politics is about persuasion. These days when we talk, and what really this raises, Jeff, is this, what should we make of rhetoric, political rhetoric? Rhetoric is a pejorative, for the most part, these days, is when we say, oh, that's mere rhetoric. That's just talk. Whereas really interests are at stake. And I think we give up something if we disparage rhetoric, political rhetoric, too completely. Aristotle valorized rhetoric. He thought that the art of rhetoric was at the heart of politics and of justice. If you think that a just society is also a democratic society, then it seems to me you have to take rhetoric seriously, morally seriously, not just as a matter of packaging and PR and spin. Because what political rhetoric involves is persuading, reaching people where they are, starting with people from where they come, and then ideally reasoning with them, deliberating, persuading, arguing, trying to take them maybe someplace else, someplace better. But I think one of the great strengths as a candidate of Barack Obama is that he understood this. He was not, people talked about his eloquence. I think he was eloquent not just in the sense that he was good with words. He was a good speechwriter, articulate. I think his eloquence is that he tapped into a hunger for politics to be, and progressive politics, to include moral and spiritual things. And for so many years, liberals and Democratic candidates had more of a technocratic, value-neutral almost approach to politics, bringing morality and even faith into politics. Many often felt, that's what the Christian fundamentalists do. That's a recipe for coercion and intolerance. He understood, and I think rightly, that that's a recipe for failure for liberals and progressives. And so rhetoric in its largest sense is a willingness to engage with the deepest moral sources, including spiritual sources, of political argument and arguments about justice.
Now, before we go to questions from the audience, one question I had in reading the book is you are not unopinionated in the book, but you are careful. I mean, you seem to be interested in laying out the arguments
right.
more than sort of advocating your version of them,
right.
although your point of view seeps through in places, but it's
right.
not a polemical book, certainly.
Right.
In teaching, in talking about to all these undergraduates in now broadcast worldwide, how do you see your role as a philosopher and as a teacher
right.
in this field?
I don't think to be an effective teacher of a subject like this, political philosophy, morally laden as it is, it's possible to be neutral. I think neutrality in a classroom in a subject like this or in a book would simply seem coy. On the other hand, I don't see my job in the classroom or even in the book as primarily to promote a particular political outlook either. So in the course, I mainly see my job as inviting and provoking students to reflect critically on their moral and political convictions, to figure out what they believe and why. In the company of some famous philosophers, many of the same philosophers who figure in the Aspen Justice and Society program, and also by wrestling with concrete questions that we argue about every day that raise big philosophical questions. So as the course unfolds, and Josh Henkin, who was there a few years back, will tell me if I'm wrong, the students don't really know particularly which view I favor until the last couple of weeks in the course. I speak more in my own voice, but by then they've been equipped with all of these other views, and they are more than able to take issue with their professor, and they do.
Last question. Just your own experience. You've been teaching a similar course, although it has changed
right.
in various ways
right.
over these years, to thousands of undergraduates. How have their views changed over the years? How are they
right.
different? The students who arrive today different from the students who arrived in the 80s?
Right. It's subtle, and I'm not sure I'm right about this, but insofar as there is a shift, and it corresponds to the period from the 80s to the present we were talking about earlier, I think market ideas figure more prominently in the starting intuitions of students. Individualistic market ideas do. Freedom of choice and consent, have always been popular as moral ideas among college students, and if anything, have gained strength. But I think that students are hungry and eager. They don't come with well worked out, for the most part, ideological views. I think they come with a yearning and a hunger to figure out really how they stand in relation to the wider world that they're about to enter as citizens. And there's something exhilarating in that, but also slightly terrifying, because they sense that engaging with what these philosophers say and going through this series of arguments with their classmates implicates them as a kind of journey in self-understanding. And they're not quite sure where the journey will end, but they do sense, rightly, that it's about them and what they believe.
Okay, let's open it up. We'll start over here. There are two people, I believe, with microphones, so you don't have to wait online or anything.
Thank you.
Yes, please introduce yourself, rather briefly, I would say.
I'm Don
But
Boulanger.
and then come up with a question.
I'm Don Boulanger. I'm here as a guest of a.
Hold the
Aspen
microphone
Institute-
closer to your
As
mouth.
I'm here as a guest of an Aspen Institute member, or attendant, alum, my wife. My question is this: you referred to providing health care with the quote twice to those who through no fault of their own, end quote. Does that mean you are not in favor of providing public drug programs or providing lung cancer coverage to smokers?
Well, I would provide the coverage, but it does raise an interesting question. If we're going to have take public responsibility for everyone's health, as I think we should, speaking here now in my own voice, I think it is a reasonable question to figure out what, whether people ride motorcycles with or without a helmet. And smoking would certainly fall into that category. So I think that there is a public stake with or without universal health care in the health and well-being of citizens. So I'm not among those. There are libertarians who oppose in principle. Many of them live in New Hampshire, where they don't have they want to get rid of seatbelt laws. Or do they have one in New Hampshire?
I think it's a
seatbelt law?
national law.
They wanted to opt out somehow in New Hampshire. Maybe that was it.
And they would motorcycle helmets, I know,
They would
has
lose
been a
federal
big
funds, and they were willing to pay the
Yeah.
price. Motorcycle helmets, with or without federal health care, I'm not among those who think that that's a violation of individual freedom that we should worry about. In the case of smoking, I think that can be seen as parallel to other public health issues.
Steve, wait for the microphone. Someone with a microphone? No, wait for the microphone. So I'm going to make you yell.
Do you think this libertarian view that we've gained for the last 30 years, which seems to be predominant, do you think it will ever change? What might cause it to change? And how long do you think it would take?
I think it's
So most of us think the otherwise, that we are our brother's keeper.
I think it's a hard thing to change, but views do change slowly. But it's an interesting question. The libertarian idea as it applies to motorcycle helmets and seatbelt laws and health care, we're familiar with that, and more or less people know where they stand on those questions. I think one of the ways in which serious public debate could gradually lead to rethinking of those positions might touch upon other areas where people might be a little bit less sure they want to overturn libertarian ideas. Civil libertarian ideas are a subset, a species of a libertarian theory. So, for example, we have debates about whether the law should permit and whether the courts should enforce contracts for commercial surrogacy, paid pregnancy. Going back to the Baby M case, the New Jersey courts had to decide that. And we have debates about whether there should be, let's say, a market in organs, for that matter, a global market in organ sales. And often the reason people give who support choice is, well, people, we own ourselves, and so we have a right to decide as individuals what shall be done with our own bodies. Now, if you think about that way of framing the question, you may also notice that that is often the way the abortion debate is framed, in terms of a property right in one's body and a certain conception of freedom following from that. I think maybe that way of framing, say, the abortion debate, to say nothing of the surrogacy and organ sale, could do with some rethinking, reframing, because if we get people in the habit of thinking of themselves as owners, property rights holders in their bodies, it's pretty difficult then to say when healthcare comes around, yeah, but you may own your body and he owns his and she owns hers, but it turns out now we're asking you to care for what happens to that person's body when they turn ill. So what's happened, I think, in this period of market triumphalism is that certain ideas of property ownership and individual choice have so seeped into the culture that it's very hard to say, no, but in healthcare, we don't want people to think that way. We may have to reframe the way we talk about some of these other issues as well.
Just if I can just add, one of the things I find interesting in looking at some of these issues is when values collide. And the Supreme Court is dealing with a classic example of that right now, which is political speech by corporations.
Yes.
Because liberals like to have free speech and no government regulation of speech, but liberals also like to regulate corporations.
Right.
Conservatives. Right. And so you see some scrambled alliances.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I would give my view on this and know I'll instantly get in trouble with my friend Kathleen Sullivan. But here it seems to me is another example where we need to have a debate. Well, there is a debate, largely among liberals, about whether corporate speech should enjoy the same protections as the political speech among citizens generally. What really is the purpose of the First Amendment's guarantee of freedom of speech? Is it for the sake of enabling democracy to flourish, or is it for the sake of guaranteeing self-expression to every conceivable actor? And having even framed the question in that way, I know that Kathleen will get me in grave trouble. And we should let her.
Right behind you there is...
Nolan Reichel. The Obama administration seems to have embraced sort of the Sunstein-Thaler views on the limitations on rational action that are sort of placed upon us or come from us based on cognitive biases.
Right.
And I'm wondering what your view, how do you think that evolving science impacts moral questions, and to what extent do you think that science could form the basis of a sort of sturdy opposition to libertarianism?
Yes.
In answering the question, could you spell out a little bit what the Sunstein whatever is?
All right, well, the question is, it's very astute, and there is an idea that rather than challenge Chicago-style free market libertarian economics and individualism and freedom of choice, we can have something that can give us more or less activist government, at least of a kind that many Democrats would recognize as theirs, by nudging people, by tweaking incentives, so that they call it libertarian paternalism. So you're tweaking incentives, you're not coercing anyone, you're not mandating anyone. The classic example is if people don't invest enough in their 401k plan when they have to opt in, you say, all right, you're automatically enrolled unless you opt out. So you preserve choice, but you change the pattern of incentives.
How about cash for clunkers?
Well, that would be another example. That would be another good example. And so the question, some think you can build up a general public philosophy for a more active government by leaving in place the fundamental premises of the libertarian Chicago school, and Chicago actually is the source of it in both the Posner version and in Cass's version, I think it's a big mistake. And I think it's a false start for a new progressive politics, largely for reasons that go back to the discussion we were having a minute ago. If you leave undisturbed the basic moral premises of the Chicago, Posner, free market idea of freedom, that essentially what freedom means is the ability of individuals to control their own bodies, to choose for themselves in the market or as consumers. I think what that misses is a larger understanding of freedom, which I would call civic as against consumerist or market freedom, that says we're really only free insofar as we are citizens who are capable of participating effectively in a democratic society. So, and to get to that, you have to disturb and challenge the Chicago free market libertarian individualist view, not try to tweak it or nudge it in a slightly more desirable direction.
How about that? Is that the lights are in my eyes. There. That's. Wait for the microphone.
Emma Coleman Jordan at Georgetown.
You need to
Yes,
speak.
Emma Coleman Jordan at Georgetown University Law Center. We have just experienced this collapse of financial institutions in September of 2008, and that set of events has opened a discussion on justice, fairness, failure, and greed. However, much of the public discourse is focused on the narrow issue of bonuses, not on the issue of income inequality, wealth inequality, and what is just in a society under these circumstances when firms like, fill in the blank, firms achieve a large return in a society where so many have so little. Would you take us beyond the bonus discussion with your observations about what justice requires in this situation?
Right, so everybody heard the question. I agree that we've had too narrow a discussion by focusing on bonuses and the fact that these are from companies that are getting government subsidies. It's especially outrageous. I agree it's especially outrageous. But it raises a broader question about compensation. And we have a compensation czar now, Kenneth Feinberg, who has a very narrow assignment.
For a handful of people at a handful of companies.
Exactly. And it doesn't reach these broader questions about who deserves what, who's entitled to what, and how the tax system should respond to it. In these days, the ratio of CEO pay to the pay of the average worker is around 350 to 1. So the average CEO makes in a day what the average worker at a big company, what the average worker makes in a year. Now you might say, and the argument is, we need to have those differentials to retain the best people, the talent, to get these companies out of the ditch that the same talent in some cases drove it into, but that's another matter. But there's another idea, which is people deserve, through the market, though it's unclear whether the market's really setting those big compensations, but people deserve what they earn. They work hard. They have special skills. In 1980, when this whole period began, the ratio in the United States was not 350 to 1. It was 42 to 1. Now, does that mean that CEOs today are 8 times as smart, 8 times as hardworking, expend 8 times as much effort as U.S. CEOs of major companies in 1980? Unlikely. Nobody would think that. Well, if that's not the reason, then what becomes of the argument about moral desert and entitlement tied to effort and talent and all of that stuff? It seems to have a lot more to do with contingent features of the labor market, of the way compensation is set, of technology and how it distributes the fruits of increased affluence than it has to do with who deserves what or who's entitled to what.
Can I just pursue one aspect of this market idea? Because something I hear in the political discourse is when statistics like that are brought out, that the income inequality is so great and so few people are making such a great deal of money, that sometimes strikes a responsive chord. But the counter argument, which I think is a very hard one for liberals, progressives to respond to, is, okay, sure, the market makes mistakes, but what's the replacement? You're going to have bureaucrats picking how much people make. You're going to have bureaucrats deciding who gets a mammogram. You're going to have bureaucrats deciding the course of American life. What's the argument against the market that will give people confidence that it's a better solution, not just something that's a greater of two evils?
Right. Well, it's a fair and hugely important question. The short answer in the compensation area is to say we don't need to don't need to get rid of the market. In some respects, we need the markets or the accountability to work better for the setting of the pay, because the people on compensation committees of these big corporations are not really accountable to the shareholders. So that's part of the problem. The broader answer, I think, is we don't need to get rid of the market to set compensation, but we have a tax system. And the tax system, the debates about what the appropriate tax level should be are often confounded by the idea that to tax these huge earnings somehow violates what the recipients of those huge earnings deserve or are due. So once you clear away that ground of objection to a different kind of tax system, then I think that opens all sorts of possibilities. So I don't think necessarily it involves overturning them. In certain areas, I think we should have a debate whether the market is the best instrument, the fairest, and for that matter, even the most efficient instrument for distributing goods. And in the area of health, I think there's good reason to think that it's neither the most fair nor the most efficient way of allocating health. But unfortunately, that question is not on the agenda in the healthcare debate. We're trying to basically nibble around the edges and make it work better.
Yes, sir. Well, one more. There we go. You're the last question.
Thank you. I'm Chester Hartman from the Poverty and Race Research Action Council in Washington and the brother of the honoree today. Where are you on the issue, very important issue, of housing, racial housing patterns? We know there is increasing racial segregation in metropolitan areas of where people live, which affects schools and everything. The Fair Housing Act has two conflicting goals. One is anti-discrimination and one is integration, and the Starrett City case being an example of where they conflicted. Right. How do you match up the clear social damage of housing segregation versus individual choice for whatever irrational or objectionable reason white person doesn't want his kids to go to school with black kids, et cetera?
Right.
Can I just interject one thing?
Yeah.
Speaking of Kathleen Sullivan, who was my local government law professor at Harvard Law School. Where are you, Kathleen?
She's over there. I spotted her.
And I remember a debate in class many years ago where this was the time of the Mount Laurel case in New Jersey, where it was an issue of do suburban communities have to be integrated, and do they have to take in a certain amount of racially diverse populations? And all the good, earnest students said absolutely. And I remember Kathleen saying, "Yeah, lots of luck in running for office in Mount Laurel on that." I mean, it just those issues. I mean, it's something that goes to very much the core of people's identifications with their home.
Yeah. Well, busing in Boston was a disaster, forced busing, in part because we didn't include the suburbs. It included only the city, but it did bump up against a very important value of community. And I think that this is partly going back to prudence and justice, but it's also going back to the matter of persuasion. I don't think we can simply explode communities in the name of justice and expect all to go well. I think we have to work within them and negotiate these competing values. Can I tell, since this is I know was the last question, a final story about Alice. When I started going, you can stay. we're celebrating 30 years of the Justice and Society program. I think I became involved 29 years ago. I was a year late. And it's been a wonderful experience. But I remember one time early on when my two sons were very young. They were running around Aspen, 4 and 2 or something like that, and it was a hectic time. And my wife, Kiko, and I were having dinner with Alice and Lou and talking about balancing family commitments versus professional ones and travel. And we asked Alice, how did you deal with that challenge? And Lou traveled a lot, being in international law and human rights. And Alice said, I had one simple rule for Lou, which was he was only allowed to be out of town at night when we had to put the kids to bed if it were for the sake of a person or a group more oppressed than me. I thought that was good advice, and I've remembered it ever since.
Absolutely. What thank you so
that,
much.
Thank you all for coming.
I just want to thank, if I could just have your attention just to thank you, Michael, Jeff, and on behalf of all my colleagues at the Aspen Institute, we love Alice, and we're so happy to have this today. There is a book, Michael's book is available as a gift as you're leaving. Michael's agreed to stay a little bit if you want it signed, so please don't forget to pick up your book. Thank you so much for joining us.